So how can we deal with our not so glorious past is the question I've decided to discuss today. First, I'm going to give you examples of how certain countries and cities have decided to deal with their not so glorious past. Then I will give arguments for and against the removal of statues, certain statues. And finally, I will give my opinion on this subject. So for a very long time, people have used monuments and statues to honour important historical figures. However, this has become quite controversial, especially since some of these figures have become rather divisive. Especially since the creation of Black Lives Matter and many other social movements. After the Civil War, many Confederate monuments and statues were erected to honour generals and soldiers who fought for the South. The problem is that these statues, some of these statues, a lot of them, were erected a long time after the Civil War ended. As far back as the beginning of the 20th century, which coincides with the Jim Crow laws and the beginning of segregation in the US. So this could obviously be seen as very provocative, especially for the black community of America. Because the Confederacy was pro-slavery, these statues do not take into consideration the suffering that black people had to endure during those times and still do. Now I'm going to be moving on to a British example. So the statue of Edward Colston was erected to honour his contribution to the city of Bristol. So with his wealth he helped make it grow. The only problem is that he got this wealth from participating in the slave trade. So that is why this statue is rather controversial. So this statue had been vandalized for years. However, the Black Lives Matter movement really triggered something in the population, and they decided to pull it down. And it was pulled down and then thrown into the river. So the last example I'm going to give is that of Bordeaux in France. So the city made its wealth by participating heavily in the slave trade. So it was decided that every street bearing the name of a slave trader or of a person involved in the slave trade would remain. However, plaques would be put under the name of the street. That way people are informed of who the person was and what their involvement in that business was. Furthermore, Bordeaux has erected a statue in honour of a slave woman, Modeste Testa, and the statue is located on the quays. There's also an exhibition in the Musée d'Aquitaine, which is dedicated to the slave trade. So Bordeaux is really wanting to educate the public about its past and its history. The city is really coming to terms with its past. There are two main arguments when it comes to monuments and statues like this. So on the one hand, you have people who want to remove these statues because they're a reminder of a painful past and because of the negative connotations of the people represented. For them it is a needless glorification of these people who don't really deserve it. Plus these statues are really divisive and they divide communities and populations. Then you have the people who think otherwise. They believe that you should not take down the statues, as as they are part of our history, and denying their existence would be a sort of rewriting of history. We can also refer to this as a sanitization of history. So for those people, we should accept social attitudes, also the fact that society changes and opinion changes through time. So what is my opinion on this subject? I believe that we should not forget our history because it is part of what led us to this particular moment in time and this situation. We shouldn't deny it either, no matter how painful it is. With history, we learn from our mistakes and we grow as a nation, as individuals. We need to educate people, the old and young generations, on what happened before us. We need to know our history, our country's history, the positives and the negatives, the glorious and the shameful. But we also need to learn our world's history, the history of other nations. We also need to accept that the past was a different time and that people did not have the same beliefs, so we shouldn't judge history. As for statues, I really think it depends on the individual. I ask myself, why were people so quick to remove statues and monuments in honor of dictators? These statues were symbols of oppression. They were there to reflect an idea rather than teach, as statues in museums do. Dictators distorted history. They falsified. They didn't tell the truth. Finally, I think that the Colston statue, which is being fixed but not renovated, in the sense that they're keeping the graffiti, I think the fact that they're keeping the graffiti is really great because it shows that Bristol is accepting the fact that the graffiti is part of the history. The toppling of the statue is part of its history now. I have many other questions that I thought of. Should India remove all of the statues of Queen Victoria that it has? It is on that question that I will leave you to ponder. Bye!